Let's rewind to 1960s apartheid South Africa, a time when the government had perfected the art of oppression and then had the audacity to call it order. After the brutal crackdown following the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, the apartheid regime banned major liberation movements like the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress. Leaders were jailed, exiled, or forced underground. The regime basically looked at the resistance and said, "Problem solved." Except it wasn't. Because in the late 1960s, a new generation of black students walked onto university campuses and immediately noticed something weird. The so-called liberal white student organizations were supposedly fighting apartheid, but they still controlled the conversation, the leadership, and the microphone. Imagine being oppressed by the state and then being politely managed by your supposed allies. Yeah, that didn't sit well. Enter Steve Biko. Biko and a group of black university students looked at the situation and basically said, "You know what? We don't need permission to fight for our own dignity." So in 1968, they broke away from white-dominated student politics and created the South African Students' Organization. And that's where the Black Consciousness movement was born. But here's the key thing. This movement wasn't just about protesting laws, it was about psychology. Because apartheid didn't just control land, jobs, and movement, it tried to control how black South Africans saw themselves. The regime pushed the idea that black people were inferior, dependent, and lucky to be guided by white authority. Biko's response? Brutal and simple. The most powerful weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So the Black Consciousness movement flipped the entire script. It preached psychological liberation first, black pride, black unity, black leadership. No waiting for white approval, no begging for inclusion. The philosophy defined black broadly. Africans, coloreds, and Indians oppressed under apartheid were encouraged to unite politically. That was dangerous for the regime, because once people stopped believing the lies of inferiority, the entire apartheid system started to wobble. And BCM didn't just stay on campuses, it spread into communities through organizations like the Black People's Convention, community clinics, literacy programs, and political education projects. Suddenly, thousands of young South Africans were thinking, wait, why exactly are we accepting this system? By the mid-1970s, the ideas of black consciousness had exploded across schools and townships, which leads directly to the next historical nightmare for the apartheid government, the Soweto Uprising of 1976. Students inspired by black consciousness flooded the streets to protest the forced use of Afrikaans in schools. The regime responded the only way it knew: bullets. Hundreds of students were killed, but the regime had already made its fatal mistake. Because once a population becomes conscious of its own power, repression stops working the way dictators hope it will. In 1977, the apartheid government arrested Steve Biko. He died in police custody after brutal torture. The state expected fear. Instead, Biko became a martyr, and the ideas of the Black Consciousness movement spread even faster. Because by then, the psychological revolution had already happened. And once people stop believing they're inferior, apartheid doesn't just look cruel, it looks ridiculous.